Greetings to all the viewers from across the nation and the globe, and welcome to Treasures from the TCU Special Collections podcast. I'm your host, DJ Pereira. In this series, we'll explore some of the most exclusive artifacts from the special collections here at TCU. Joining me will be expert archivists and librarians who will give us an intimate exploration into some of these precious resources. So, why don't you come and join me and let's take a look at what's inside the vault. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Treasures from the TCU Special Collections Vault podcast. I'm your host, DJ Pereira, and joining me today is TCU's Rare Books librarian, Zana Bingham. Zana, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Zana, I am extremely excited because I understand that you have a priceless artifact to share with us. Please introduce.
Yes. So this is an item that was purchased during our centennial year, the 100th anniversary of the Mary Couts Burnett Library. And it was purchased with generous donation from the Friends of the Library that support us here. And it is a first edition of Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass.
It's incredible. First edition. I have to ask, how does one go about acquiring such a valuable piece of history?
We purchased this from a reputable rare books dealer that I've had a relationship with for some time. And it is, in this case, this is a copy that's been preserved very well. So there are all kinds of places that books live in people's homes. So something from 1845, to put that into perspective, this came out the year after A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens. This was published about, 7 months before Texas became part of the United States. So during this 19th century time frame, people would purchase books, and who knows where books end up often. If your entire family read it, this was incredibly popular. And so condition was often determined by how many different people read it and how careful they were with an item. In this case, I can't tell you exactly who it was that preserved it, but at some point it was living in a place that was not too hot and not too damp, and someone who knew books rescued it from wherever it was living and put it on the market.
Well, at first glance, for a first edition, it is in fantastic condition. And so I'm curious, and I'm pretty sure our audience would be curious to know, how does the TCU Special Collections go about handling and showcasing? Are there particular equipment and procedures that you have to exercise in order to preserve the fragility?
So we have a couple of different things. We have a very secure vault, as we've talked about our treasures, and that has highly limited access. So that's kind of protecting the physical item is sort of that first layer. In this space, we also have equipment that keeps the temperature and the humidity at a very constant state. And then we have monitors to ensure that stays in place. When we're handling the book, which is the whole point of these books, we want to use them and not just store them away. We use things like this book cradle, which allows the book to be opened without it being opened too far. So if we open this first edition here to our title page and then the frontispiece, you can see the full title here. And when we want to open it to a certain spot, we will often use these weighted strings, I guess. Often they are curtain weights, but we use these weights that are encased in a very clean white material, fabric. And then we are able to open the book to a certain spot and keep it where it should be while we're using it without having our hands hold it, which can deposit oils onto the book or having pages flip back and forth while you're in the middle of using them is a good way to accidentally rip a page.
Speaking of ripping pages, I'm curious to know if rare book librarians such as yourselves and even archivists, are they compelled to use white gloves, or is that a taboo in the world of collecting?
I can say that it depends, but almost never. White gloves are very valuable when it comes to handling things that are chemical, that are part of a chemical process. So certain kinds of photographs, albumin tints, various materials that have that kind of coating on it, then we do want to use gloves, because whatever oils we have on our hands can affect the image, for example. There are occasionally books that have the same kinds of prints and images inside that we would handle with gloves when we're touching the image themselves. But for most of the things that are in our rare books collection, we actually just have very clean hands. White gloves minimize your ability to feel textures and to be specific. It affects your dexterity. And so by cleaning our hands and not using gloves, we ensure that we don't rip the book, we don't accidentally have an edge get caught, but we also are not depositing those oils onto the materials.
That's amazing. Okay. So in other words, it's a misconception to have to wear gloves when handling historical artifacts.
Often, yes.
Okay.
TV likes it a lot. Makes you feel like things are important, but mostly because it would be weird to show a lot of hand washing on TV, I think.
Okay. Well, there's no way to overstate this question, but explain to us the historical and cultural significance of this particular publication.
So this is one of the most important books ever published in the United States by an American author. It is arguably the foundational text of African American publications. Frederick Douglass, as you know, was born in Maryland as an enslaved man, and was able to, around the age of 20, go north to his freedom. And as he was speaking and working with other abolitionists and giving lectures and things, there was a lot of question as to his personal background. Could someone so well spoken really have been an enslaved person in the South? And so that was a big part of the creating of this book. There's an introduction by another abolitionist who is verifying that, in fact, this book was written by Frederick Douglass, who had, in fact, been, as the full title tells us, an American slave. This book was one of the most read in the 19th century, and still continues to be read today. I cannot count the number of classes that are here on campus where this is required reading. It's a commonly read book in middle school or high school as well. And having the original record of this helps us understand a world in 1845 that where someone who was well-spoken needed to prove themselves.
Yes. And you, just to be clear, you did say that even at the collegiate level, this is required reading.
Yes, absolutely.
So can you describe particular events or moments in the narrative life of Frederick Douglass that make it such a compelling and necessary read?
I think a huge part of it is his depictions and clear descriptions of his life in slavery. He describes various events that happened to his fellow African Americans. There are a number of painful experiences, and as well as understanding what freedom meant to him. At the beginning of the book, when he's around 7, he is sent to live in Baltimore with an in-law of the family that he was with initially. And the mistress there had she had worked before she was married, and so she didn't really know, having worked in trade, she didn't really understand the culture around how one should treat an enslaved person at the time. And so she was very kind as a result. And she started teaching Frederick Douglass, this young boy, how to read. And so started with the alphabet and then onto 3 and 4 words until her husband put a stop to it. Because if a slave could read, then a slave would find freedom. You could not keep a literate man enslaved. And so that experience of Frederick hearing why it was that he shouldn't know how to read was a massively motivating fact for him. And so he learned to read, taught others to read, and then was able to speak up for the enslaved Americans in the South that in ways that he wouldn't have been able to. But in this case, that Baltimore gentleman let him know that his freedom was to reading, and that was a huge factor in becoming who he was.
Would such a controversial publication have been censored by society in order to suppress the access that the African American community could have had, should have had to such enigmatic writing?
Yeah, so this was published in Boston, and the publisher is the Anti-Slavery Office. That is not a coincidence. The further south that you traveled, you tended to have more people who were comfortable with slavery. Boston, of course, that was kind of a bastion of activism.
Yes.
And so it wasn't a large volume publisher who published this and made the book a reality. It was an anti-slavery office fully understanding what this text was. They initially printed 5,000 copies, and they were all sold out in less than 6 months, which is pretty exciting. There were multiple printings of this exact same text. There's an 1846 edition, 1847, and so each book is a little bit different, different binding or different aspects of the material itself, the physical materiality. But it was, I can't tell you how censored it was in the South, but it would have physically had to have been taken Boston South by either booksellers or people who had purchased the book. So that it wasn't really getting sent to a bookseller in Baltimore, for example.
Oh, the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't fully realized in Texas until 2 years after the fact. Would you imagine this particular book being made public? Could it have been made public for the African American community?
This is where you get into the fact that it was illegal to teach someone who was enslaved to read.
Okay.
Of course, many learned how to read anyway and taught their community members. These stories certainly were not uncommon. In fact, Frederick Douglass, he recounts other people's experiences, other enslaved men and women, and in secondhand accounts. So the stories certainly were told. In fact, shortly after he escaped north, Frederick Douglass went to the UK, to the British Isles, and went on lecturing tours in England and especially in Ireland. In Dublin, he was well received, certainly. And so he remained there for a couple of years so as to ensure that he was not recaptured and then sent south. So
it's almost like an asylum situation.
Yeah, and he had some British friends who raised the money to buy his freedom so that he could return to the U.S., therefore allowing him to continue with his work in the place that it was most relevant and not be worried about a former slave owner.
What fascinates me is how you mentioned the illegalities of educating an African American, and we're talking about a time period before Jim Crow laws were systemic, and that to me is just, it's hard to comprehend.
Yeah, honestly, there are a number of scholars who look at the history of literacy specifically, and it's amazing that when an individual can read, they become educated and they can't be controlled in the same sort of way. And about this time, if we look at this particular book, the paper that it is made with is of decent quality. In the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, we moved from what is called the hand press period, when paper was made by hand, books were made by hand, everything was done by hand, into the machine press period. And we figured out how to make paper with wood pulp, which was great because paper suddenly became really inexpensive. And so books, therefore, became inexpensive. As this move in technology, this innovation happened, we also have a boom in literacy. And it's no coincidence that that occurs around the time of the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, and Juneteenth here in Texas.
Are there any other interesting stories or mysteries surrounding the contents of this book or the publication/distribution?
So this, written specifically, as we talked about, to prove that Frederick Douglass was in fact who he said he was. It wasn't necessarily intended to be a full reckoning of an enslaved person's experience. So Frederick Douglass wrote a couple of additional sections of his autobiography. He continued with the story and shared more information and created a larger market for the narratives from formerly enslaved individuals. Harriet Jacobs, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, a much more rare book than this one because so few copies were printed. That was another book that was published with the support of white publishers, in large part because of the success of Frederick Douglass.
You know, I can't help but ask, but you've emphasized the rarity and the exclusivity of these books, titles, editions, but I would love to know if there's a value that can be stated. What is the value for something as priceless as this edition?
Well, I would argue that it is priceless, especially being able to touch something is vitally important. This book is available, people read it on YouTube. There's audiobooks all over the place. You can read digital copies constantly. But understanding the book as Frederick Douglass himself held it in his hands and his contemporary readers, and what it was that caught the attention of so many Americans was a vital part of this. So getting to experience the original form of what a contemporary reader would have experienced. And in fact, this particular copy has a number of marks of ownership. There are some stray marks here in the back. And then in the front, we have a couple of different things that are interesting and then unique about this particular copy. So we know that it was owned by multiple people, which makes sense, having been published in 1845. And here on the first flyleaf is a book plate from William H. Baldwin. It's a fascinating illustration, and we don't know the exact age, but given by how the glue has, or the adhesive of whatever kind it was, has affected this old paper, we can guess that it was certainly at least 1920s, probably, or earlier. And then on the very front flyleaf end paper, we actually have an inscription that is dated 1846. And it is, I believe, James Hooper. And then we have Walpole right here, which is a city in New Hampshire. And
I just love the nuances you're pointing out that have nothing to do with the content necessarily, but with the structure and the book making aspects. And of course, these handwritten inscriptions is just, it's a privilege to see and hear you talk of. And I'm sure our viewers will appreciate it equally.
I hope so. This is an important volume, and we are excited to have our students come in and experience this foundational text in this format. And something else that I think is really interesting to notice is the binding here. So as you can see, there's a bit of a shift, kind of a lean to the book, which is a little bit unfortunate.
Yes, I see it.
It's important to keep your books upright. Bookends are our friend. This clearly did not live in that category for a little while. But this binding is incredibly good condition. It has gold tooling on it, this gold lettering. It is faded from the spine, but it's still intact on the cover. That's unusual. And then we have this gorgeous blind tooling. So all of these motifs that have been kind of carved into the book plate. Interestingly, Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven and Other Tales was published in 1845 as well, another Baltimore gentleman. And if you look at the edition that came out in November, we had the same sort of blind tooling. This was printed by a group that was creating kind of a bunch of, they were creating a lot of kind of seminal volumes of things. So this was part of the Library of American Books. And so you can see this was kind of more mass produced than this one. But this one certainly is a deeper cut in. So again, published the same exact year. This was further south than this book. But interestingly, also both have water damage on the back.
And what does that tell you?
It tells us that these books were used and or stored not well enough, I guess.
I see.
It's amazing how often leaks come up or various issues with where we store things. But these also indicate use more than anything. This is one of the most widely read books of the 19th century, less than Uncle Tom's Cabin, but more than a lot of other texts. And so the use is really unique in the frequency.
You've gone into great depths into describing the annotations and the documentations and the anecdotes attached to these legendary publications. What place, do they have a place in our society when you think of all the digital tools that we have at our disposal? Is there a place for a first edition to survive?
As a rare books librarian who likes being employed, I would say yes. There's always a place. Digital copies of texts are, in fact, I'm not going to say they're not useful. They are. There's some great things about digital texts. They are much more portable. You can search them. OCR is a great magical thing for many people. If we want to understand an original text, we need to go back to the original. It is incredibly easy to change a word or many in digital texts.
True.
The trace would never be visible to a consumer that X, Y, or Z. There have been many regimes in history who have burned books, therefore destroying the information inside. That's much easier to do today when it comes to a digital file. Granted, with the digital, we have a proliferation of copies, but having the first edition makes it possible for us to understand the author's intent. Frederick would have had a say in the sizing and the chapters and things like that. And so if we want to understand how he meant the book to be read, which is, I think, imbues additional meaning into his words, we have to have that first edition. It makes the history aspect of this book so important.
It makes me ponder how, within the context of this discussion, how propaganda has evolved over time. You mentioned 1845 and how propaganda back then took shape in the form of suppressing and obstructing information, right? Preventing the proliferation of literacy, to targeted groups of peoples. And yet, today, fast forward to the 21st century, with the proliferation of digital tools, it is easy to omit, twist, manipulate language. So now you have disinformation, and how that can lead to what we can describe as revisionism. And that was a topic that we discussed in an earlier episode. And I do admire the fact that you are constantly preaching that to understand history, we have to go back to its roots and we have to read it. That is the primary form of interaction in order to enhance understanding. Well, Zana, I would just like to ask how you and the Special Collections, how do you intend to promote this edition? Because I understand this was just recently acquired. And how will the TCU student body and the TCU faculty get to interact with this? And how will you manage the volume of requests that I'm sure will proliferate?
I would say the way that I want anyone to interact with this is physically. We have a good condition book. It's not falling apart so that other people can hold it. We can go anywhere and see displays of valuable things that we can't touch. Having something here in the Special Collections in the Mary Couts Burnett Library allows for handling. And there's a pretty big difference between looking at something under some glass compared to flipping through this book exactly the way that James Hooper, or who first purchased it, would have. We are excited to have all of our students come. We expect a lot of freshmen and sophomores, quite a bit of history, politics, or political science rather. There's a number of different departments that read this, and so we are thrilled to have students come in and have a better understanding of how that text was first shared widely and first published. We do expect plenty of handling and lots of visits, but that is why we are so careful with our temperature, our humidity, and with our very clean hands. Can
the public avail themselves of interacting with this? What is the process?
Absolutely. We have the ability to make appointments on our website. We'll have that link down below. So making an appointment so you can come in, we'll have the book pulled and ready for you. We would then place it in a cradle. We would ensure that you had clean hands, and we would allow you to flip through that very gently. Our students will also have a good chance to hold this and to experience what someone in 1845 would have experienced when holding this vital text to American history. By making that appointment, or you can always walk in. We love having students come in individually. We also have a lot of classes. So we are looking forward to having history departments, English departments, political science, a variety, our African American studies courses, a variety of various individuals will come in classes to come and see this.
And how does you and the Special Collections make the faculty aware of recent and vital acquisitions such as this?
We do it in a couple of different ways. In October this past fall, we were able to have an open house where we invited our faculty, and we pulled out some things that were interesting. We also have a newsletter. We could link that down below too, as well as emails that we will send to specific departments or individuals that work with our Special Collections frequently. So we want to spread the word as much as we possibly can.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, please make it a point to schedule an appointment with the Special Collections at TCU's Mary Couts Burnett Library. Zana, I cannot tell you what a privilege it was to hear your examination on the narration of the life of Frederick Douglass. Thank you.
Thanks.